Last week, we began our new course on causes and cures of violence. Briefly, allow me to go over our syllabus. Our last session was an introduction to the course. This week, we begin the causes or pathogenesis section, in which we will go over the biology of violence, the psychology of violence, and then the symbolism or spiritual causes of violence. Then we will leave the individual framework to enter the social framework, covering the sociology and anthropology of violence, the political science and economics of violence, and structural, environmental, and nuclear violence. Afterward, we will briefly cover the consequences of violence before moving on to the cures or prevention section, which will illustrate a myriad of solutions. For further details, please refer to the reading that was sent out this morning. Hence, in today's session, we will talk about the biology of violence. By the end, you will hopefully recognize that our biology is a story of connections, not destiny. For generations, thinkers have tried to explain why humans hurt one another. In the 19th century, the question seemed simple, if disturbing. Criminality was claimed to be visible in the body, inscribed in sloping foreheads and heavy jaws. Phrenologists read the skull as if it were a map, seeking the so-called seat of violence behind the ear. Their science was crude, contributing to racism and biological determinism, and yet their fantasy of certainty has never quite left us. Even today, in the courtroom, lawyers present brain scans as evidence of culpability. The history of the biology of violence may be seen as the history of humanity's desire to simplify what cannot be simplified. The truth is that not only violence, but the behavior of any biological system cannot be separated from the whole. General systems theory offered an early alternative to reductionism, describing living organisms as open systems in constant exchange with their environments. This systems perspective transformed biology from a discipline of fixed causes and effects into one of relationships, feedback mechanisms, and ecology. The study of violence, once obsessed with causality and determinism, is now learning to think this way. Biology is not the end of the story. It is the connective tissue between the psychological, the social, and the environmental. It shows us that life, even at its most brutal, is an interchange between the body and the world. Violence and aggression, for instance, are often conflated, but they tell different stories. Aggression is a neutral, adaptive energy, the spark that drives a mother to protect her children, or a surgeon to act decisively. The hormone cortisol mobilizes this readiness to confront threat, while oxytocin, the so-called love hormone, which normally soothes and nurtures, can paradoxically amplify defensive aggression when one's offspring are endangered. Violence, by contrast, is maladaptive, destructive, and uniquely human. It emerges when aggression has no outlet, when individuals or societies run out of nonviolent means to express their strivings. In other words, aggression can be placed in the service of pro-social, productive, and creative aspirations, whereas when such avenues are blocked, the same energy collapses into violence. Related to this, I must make a statement about mental illness. Contrary to popular fears, mentally ill persons are not the primary perpetrators of violence. Landmark studies show that rates of violent behavior among psychiatric patients match the general population, unless social factors such as drugs or alcohol were involved. In fact, people with serious mental illness are more likely to be victims of violence and abuse than perpetrators. As the deinstitutionalization era in the United States demonstrated, shunting people with psychiatric disorders into jails and prisons has merely displaced suffering, not resolved it. Biology does not absolve responsibility. Even the most psychotically impaired individual retains a great deal of agency. And very few people, about 1%, are ever found to be not guilty by reason of insanity. If earlier generations of scientists sought to locate the violent brain, recent decades have shown that the brain itself is changeable. The discovery of neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize and grow new connections across the lifespan, has completely upended the notion of a fixed neural destiny. Early experiences, especially those marked by neglect or trauma, sculpt neural pathways in ways that echo across time and even generations. Chronic stress dysregulates what is called the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, or the HPA axis, flooding the body with cortisol and altering the very architecture of emotion. Yet the same mechanisms also enable healing. Secure attachment, therapy, education, and social connection can reshape neural networks toward empathy and restraint. We find that even the most violent offenders reveal patterns of brain injury, trauma, and environmental deprivation. But biology is the stage, not the script. The convergence of temperament, neurobiology, and circumstance, not inborn essence, produces violence. The field of epigenetics explores how experience modifies gene expression without changing the DNA itself. Chemical tags can switch genes on or off, meaning that trauma, poverty, or nurturing care can literally rewrite the molecular instructions that shape brain development. One of the most striking findings comes from children with a genetic variant associated with low monoamine oxidase A, or MAOA, activity, who were more likely to become violent only when they were also maltreated. Genes, in other words, were necessary, but insufficient for the expression of violence. Later research confirms that high-risk combinations rarely express themselves without environmental triggers. The corollary is hopeful, for this means that positive environments, stable families, safe neighborhoods, and nurturing care can biologically embed peace. Nature and nurture, long pitted against each other, are now understood as complementary co-authors in shaping human behavior. A new book came out this year called The Ideological Brain, which argues that cognitive rigidity and ideological extremism are themselves forms of violence, mental rather than physical, but neurologically related. Based on new research, it claims that people with less cognitive flexibility and greater sensitivity to threat tend to adopt more dogmatic, polarized beliefs. The same brain circuits implicated in aggression, the amygdala, the anterior cingulate cortex, and the prefrontal regions, also regulate openness to new ideas. Authoritarianism, whether right-wing or left-wing, correlates with structural differences in the prefrontal and insular cortices, reflecting reduced capacity for ambiguity and empathy. Recent imaging studies even show that dopamine release in the ventromedial prefrontal cortex predicts adaptability, the biological substrate of open-mindedness. Violence of belief, then, mirrors violence of action. Both are features of flexibility within complex systems. Through these insights, the biology of violence emerges as an ethical science. The formula once imagined as gene translating directly into behavior has evolved into a web. Genes plus epigenetic modulation plus neuroplastic pathways plus environmental interaction plus intentional choice equal behavior. No single variable is sufficient. Each shapes and reshapes the others. In this integrated model, biology does not dictate fate, but provides possibilities. The brain's nearly infinite neural combinations are what make free will possible. Far from undermining moral agency, biology grounds it in the generative openness of life. The implications are profound. Violence, whether expressed through assault, neglect, or ideology, arises when this open system collapses into rigidity, when fear overrides empathy, when social structures block adaptation, and when belief hardens into dogma. Cruelty, therefore, may be seen as stemming from an inability to integrate or even to tolerate complexity. Conversely, peace and morality depend on neural and social flexibility. The capacity to revise, to imagine, and to feel another's pain as one's own. These traits are not metaphysical gifts, but biological potentialities, cultivated or destroyed by experience. In the end, the biology of violence teaches humility. It reveals that no single discipline can claim the hard truth. Biology is not destiny. Reductionism, whether scientific or ideological, is itself a refusal to see the living whole. To study the biology of violence, then, is to study the conditions of peace, the intricate dance of molecules and meanings that make empathy, compassion, and living together possible. In a world tempted by simplistic theories and even more simplistic solutions, the new biology offers a different lesson. Life and human complexity within it beckons us to shape our own destiny.